We now move to a special session that focuses on a theme of immense contemporary relevance, escaping the middle income trap, the imperative of state capacity enhancement. While we have achieved steady growth and lifted millions out of poverty, the real test lies ahead. That is, moving from middle income status to high income status. In securing this transition, strong state capacity is crucial by ensuring effective governance, policy execution, and institution building. For this session, we have Mr. Shishir Priyadarshi, President of Chintan Research Foundation, and he'll be chairing the session. For the special remark, we have with us Dr. Rakesh Mohan. Dr. Rakesh Mohan is former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Dr. Mohan is President Emeritus and a Distinguished Fellow of the Center for Social and Economic Progress, New Delhi. He has served as a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India and World Bank, as Executive Director on the Board of the International Monetary Fund, as Secretary, Economic Affairs, Chief Economic Advisor in the Indian Ministry of Finance, and Economic Advisor in the Ministry of Industry. I now hand over to Mr. Priyadarshi to please take the session forward.
Thank you. Look, it's a difficult task to compete on one side with the External Affairs Minister and the other side with dinner. And, we have this, you can't miss the opportunity of not listening to and not interacting with a person as huge and varied experience as Dr. Rakesh. Your credentials have already been spoken, so I won't mention them again. But two things to the extent of repetition, I must say. Don't have too many people who've been, the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank for 2 terms. In addition to also having been in the government, the Secretary Expenditure is Secretary Economic Affairs and the Chief Economic Advisor. These are genuinely difficult assignments. This is somehow not working. Thank you. Thank you so much. Look, but let me get straight to the point. And the point is that what we would love to hear from Sir here is, obviously, as the title suggests, we are talking about, let's say the middle income or the middle income trap specifically. And India obviously is seeking to transition into an upper middle and eventually a high income economy. So I want to ask you, sir, that what strategic shifts both in policy, and I know the other aspect also that you would like to talk about, governance. So what shifts in both policy and governance do you believe are essential so as to prevent a slowdown or so-called, which many middle-income countries face and has been and called the middle-income trap? And how can therefore India convert its demographic advantage and rising aspirations into preventing such a fall? So over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Dean Mattu and all the organizers of this for inviting me. Although I must have done something wrong in my last life to be asked to come after the External Affairs Minister, and as eloquent an External Affairs Minister as we have. And thank you everyone who is restraining yourselves from going off for dinner. You must have done something wrong in last lives also to want to have this punishment. Let me also want to make one introductory remark which is not in this. If you're going to get to upper middle high income status, you can't have a country when the External Affairs Minister of a country comes to the Premier University and there are 1,000 guards outside and a gunman standing here. No country can progress with free thought if this is the kind of security you need. I just come back after a 2-week tourist trip to China. Of course, there must be huge security out there in Tiananmen Square, etc. But I didn't see even one gunman in 2 weeks anywhere. And I'm not saying there's not security. There must be huge security out there. Okay. So So I'm just saying this as the beginning of my remarks, that in terms of governance, that if this is what is needed for the external affairs minister of the country to come to the major function of the premier university in the country, there's got to be something wrong. You cannot progress if these are the kind of governance or social situation that we have in the country, where the government feels that the external affairs minister is in danger in a university. I cannot believe it. At the same time, I was there at another conference, the Quarterly Economic Conclave in the Taj Palace yesterday. The minister gave the concluding speech there. There was no gunman there. He must be just scared of students. And I'm saying this seriously, actually, that it is offensive. We should not put up with it. It's an indicator that we're not going ahead and that we need some governance reforms. I'm sorry to start with this, but my car was stopped at 4 places. First, they said you walk, even though it is raining. And of course, my volunteer, he helped. But I'm just saying, I'm not saying this as a complaint. I'm making it as a comment on a governance situation. Sorry about this, but I do feel that we see this everywhere. This is just one example, everywhere. And central Delhi is full of gunmen. Tiananmen Square didn't have a single, there was huge security there, not one gunman that I saw. And that's an authoritarian society. We call ourselves a democracy. Okay, sorry to start with this. Okay, but I do find it. Happens. There's nothing special here. It happens all the time. Anyway, so the point actually is that we have done very well, and the one way I look at it is we have what I call the first generation of reforms, which no one else does, which is the 1950s, immediately after independence, and people forget this, that we had zero growth for 100 years before independence, and it went up about a little over 4% from 1950 to 65. So that was a huge thing. And by reforms, I mean the planning system, the savings rate was only 10% at the time, 10 or 12% at the time. And so actually achieving 4% growth with only 12, and then savings rate start going up, was an incredible achievement. People now think everything was wrong at that time. We did have, as the minister said also actually, we had a lost decade after mid-60s to around the mid-80s, actually, which does coincide with one particular prime minister. And then things started changing after that. And of course, what I call the second generation reforms came in the 1990s, where we freed the country of a huge set of unnecessary controls and regulations. I don't have time right now, but if you wanted to set up a business during all that period, right, the number of permissions you had to get. In fact, I'm quite amazed that any industry was set up, actually. I was the economic advisor, Ministry of Industries. That's why I studied all the controls at that time, and then that led to the reforms. So that brings me to the current, so that we now need a third generation of reforms. But most of that had to do with process reforms. The difference, what we could do in the 1990s and following across the last 25 years, mostly what you might call reforms by announcement. That is, we could just announce in 1991 that we're removing all the industrial controls. Trade policy reforms took a little longer. But again, they could all be done by announcement in terms of, I'm now reducing the tariffs from say this. It took about 15 years, but that had to be done. Similarly, you could just announce that you can remove import controls and so on. The difficulty now is you need much more process reforms, okay? And what I mean by enhancing state capacity is that, one of the odd things is that everyone emphasizes the huge Indian bureaucracy. Actually, Indian bureaucracy is very small as a proportion of population compared to most countries, compared certainly to the United States, okay, which is the most capitalist country in the world. And I don't mean that you should keep hiring people for doing nothing, obviously. The point is that we have continued the colonial system of administration, where the way I put it is you have a viceroy in every district. District magistrate, collector, deputy commissioner, the different designations. And we now have, say, about 50 government programs or more. Could be education, could be welfare. There are so many, and there's so many things the government is doing for the last so many years, right? Not just this government, I'm talking about last government 50 years. Now, there is no domain capacity to administer all those programs, and it is the collector or the district magistrate, whatever his designation may be, who's the chair of every program. And he or she gets transferred every 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, whatever. I think the situation improved somewhat in the last number of years. But the point is that I don't think there's any other country that I have been able to see, maybe there must be actually, where there isn't the kind of local government that you should have. Because these are birds of passage. They're all very good people. I'm not knocking the IAS or the IPS. They're all very smart fellows because of the way they're selected. But the point is that they're birds of passage. They have zero interest in where they are. They're then looking at the next posting. Again, I'm not knocking them at all because they're hardworking fellows, okay? Like him, right? Like him. Yes, I know. He revealed his batchmates and so on. So, but the serious point is they're very smart fellows. I'm not joking and I'm not, being non-serious at all. But what I'm saying is that it is actually a miracle that many of these people who go from one thing to another then do very well, right? But what does it mean? To give one example, if you talk to any trade negotiators in the world, they all say it's very difficult to deal with Indian trade negotiators. What is the reason? That most of them don't have domain capacity. It's much easier and less risky to say no. To say yes, it means domain capacity. And again, to give the biggest example, we were lucky, or it was raised, that Mr. Narasimha Rao appointed Dr. Manmohan Singh as a finance minister. That was very important in my view, because he had served as everything. Economic advisor, chief economic advisor, secretary economic affairs, governor RBI, deputy chairman planning commission. So everything in the economy was inside his head, or turban, as you might say. Okay. So the thing was therefore he had internal confidence in that what he was doing, the reforms he was saying, was something that should be done and could be done. What happens with other ministers, again, many the people I have worked with from the politicians are very smart and very good people, actually. But the point is that if you don't have the domain knowledge inside your head, you have to rely on advisors. Then what you have to do, which advisor do I believe? Of course, that's the judgment issue, and politicians are good at these kind of judgment issues. But I'm giving just this example, that this is, I think, the best example of what we can do. It obviously silences people after a few minutes. So, you're talking too much. No, so what I'm saying, so the point I'm making is that I'm giving the best example of the impact of domain knowledge. I'll give you another example. I was given the task of chairing the National Transport Development Policy Committee, and it took 3.5 years over that, from 2010 to 2014. And in my committee, the secretary of every transport-related ministry, from the chairman of the Railway Board, the secretary, the road transport, etc., also other ministries, power, and so on. The amazing thing is that in those 3.5 to 4 years, there were 4 secretaries or chairman railway board in every ministry. Therefore, I put the members on the first page just to show people this is how we govern. And again, my point there is that if you have generalists, okay, who do not have domain knowledge, they work very hard, they don't have backup enough also. You can't go to the next level, because now also, as the minister was saying, you need much more expertise. If you want to go to higher levels of economic development, you need people who have expertise. Okay, another level of governance. I'm sorry, you asked me one question, but I'm giving you. Okay. So, another level of governance. I looked at the number of days that the parliament sits. And this is last 20 years, not last 2 years, 5 years, last 20, 25 years. Average about 70 days in a year. the British Parliament and the US Congress each surprising with similar number of days, 170 days a year. Okay. Now we need much more legislation, right? And given the problems in the state capacity from where the legislation comes, and then you only sit for 70 days, and if half of those 70 days go into shouting, then you clearly can't get good laws. If you don't have good laws, then there's much more confusion, which is why everyone complains about bureaucracy, because the bureaucracy has been given a law which is not well drafted, which comes back to state capacity. Okay? Similarly, even if something is well drafted, the person administering at the bottom level also does not have knowledge. Okay? Another example, this of course everyone knows perhaps, in the judicial system, a lot of stuff is said about we have problems of contract enforcement, etc., but I'm going to the criminal side. I think many people know this. 75% of people in our jails are under trials. In other words, they have never been convicted. Someone may be there for a few days, a few weeks, some there for 10 years. Okay? How can a country, a democracy, where 3/4 of people in prisons have never been convicted? Okay? But there's an opposite aspect to this, which is also very strange, I don't understand, that as a proportion, the prisoners as a proportion of the population are about the least that we have. US is the highest. Okay? So when I see that the number of prisoners, including poor fellows who have been in jail without being convicted, even then, the proportion of the number of prisoners as a total population among the lowest in the country, that either we are very law-abiding fellows, so there are no crimes, so you don't go to jail, or then you're not caught. Either way. Right? Interestingly, Pakistan is exactly the same proportion, both for proportion of under trials as well as proportion of prisoners of population. There's something similar, obviously, in the systems from the colonial times. I think you better ask another question.
I don't need to actually, I think you don't really need a moderator. You've got so much breadth and width. But using my small bit of moderator's right of reply, one to strengthen a point that Dr. Rakesh Mohan said. He mentioned China and security. Let me mention Switzerland. You went for about 2 weeks. I stayed there for about 20 plus years. I know. No. That's what I said. You went to China for 2 weeks, but I stayed in Switzerland for about 20 years. You saw a lot of governance, but you did not see government. And I think that really is an essence of perhaps what you're saying, that as you move into this middle income, you want to avoid being part of the middle income trap, you've got to ensure that you have far, far more governance rather than visible government. The second point, obviously, yes, I know it's in jest, and you probably did bureaucrats like any other part of society, you have both good and less good. But yes, they do provide continuity. And I perhaps had that wonderful distinction of both seeing for about 20 years from inside and then about 25 years from outside. But that's not what these people are. I'm going to forewarn you that we've got about 15 more minutes or 10 possibly, and there are two issues I would like you to touch upon. So I'll raise them together. One is, you spent a long time, obviously, at RBI. But this whole issue, I think, remains perpetual. How do you balance both inflation on one side and growth trajectory on the other? So if there are any insights, especially in the present circumstances when we are also tackling with a lot of global issues having impact. And the second, it would be great if you also touched on, government is spending a lot of money on infrastructure. And I think it'd be great to hear your thoughts and views also. Do you feel that space is being in a way crowded in? Do you feel, any thoughts on these two would be great, sir. Over to you.
Thank you very much. First, again, on the state capacity issue with the RBI. Okay. What is interesting is that the number of so-called officer or professional level staff at the RBI today is about 15% lower or 20% lower than it was in 2008-9. Okay? And this is during a period when the financial sector expanded like mad. All right? And things become much more technical, much more complex, etc. So during this kind of a change, again going up from low middle income to upper middle income to high income, you need smart or well-trained regulators, and also enough of them. Okay? NBFCs have mushroomed, as they should. I'm not saying they shouldn't. But all I'm saying is, again, as an example, that because we've thought this too big, etc., that even in the Reserve Bank of India, which is among our best institutions, right, we're handicapping them. Okay? And the Federal Reserve has a larger number of people when they don't have all the functions of the RBI. So that's just to start. Second, on the inflation and growth issue, I happen to be among a very small minority, maybe minority one, who believe that inflation targeting is silly. Okay? I think it's a Mickey Mouse interpretation of economics. Let me explain. Now, how can we pretend that one variable, that is the interest rate, can control inflation? That the central banks have got to control inflation, absolutely correct, right? But it needs a whole host of variables to work at the same time, which incidentally in India we actually do. That is to say that because 45% of the CPI is composed of food prices, therefore the government has a big role, and the government in terms of its food programs, etc., free food and all the kind of things, also procurement and everything else, and actually has a big role, and the Reserve Bank recognizes that. All right. So because this is another thing that I think we need to have more confidence in ourselves and not ape the West. Okay. Now, what is the theory behind inflation targeting? Which is that look, a lot of activity in the markets is related to interest rates. So interest rates go down, you can do more borrowing, etc. So greater activity takes place. And if there's a boom taking place, you increase the interest rate. The markets are more, a lot of housing is sensitive, housing investment sensitive to interest rates, consumer durables interest rates, etc. There are many more people in the market, all right? But in countries like ours, of course, this is increasing. But in countries like ours, how many people are affected by interest rates, all right? They're not watching the market. We talk to the market fellows, they'll give, and it's very interesting actually. If you, the RBI, in fact, I started it, does an inflation expectations survey every quarter. Okay, when I proposed this back in 2005 or so, and as people, the view was, if you ask people, what is your inflation expectation, लोगों को मालूम नहीं होगा. I said, no, I'm damn, you people, everyone will give a number. Okay, so we finally, after a lot of discussion, we started it. What is interesting in that, the service, if you look at it, that the household level inflation expectations are consistently higher than the market participants. The market participants' inflation expectations are not very far from what the Reserve Bank says. Okay? Which in itself is an indicator to me that obviously for most people, the inflation expectations are from the daily things that they buy, not from overall CPI, etc., because it's a very high weight. So what I'm saying is that the inflation and growth issue, I think is a false thing. All right, that's what I'm trying to say. That a central bank in countries like ours has to give huge importance to financial stability, right, number one, because people cannot afford to lose money because they're too poor and don't have too much money. The last thing you want is a bank going down. Okay? Which is why I think very intelligently, we don't let banks go down. People criticize that look, this is very silly. But you have to think, look, who are the people who have deposits out there, right? So you have to, so what I'm saying is that a central bank in a developing country has many functions. Yes, inflation has to be topped because once again, people can't afford to cope with high prices. Right? They need financial stability. They need confidence in the banks. It's very difficult, for example, even to people say, but we have competition. It's not easy to change from one bank to another. Once you've got into one bank, you're there. It's very difficult to change. So what I'm saying is many of these market issues don't work in terms of these kind of, which is why banks have to be regulated. So again, a big function of central banks is to regulate the banks and, of course, other financial institutions. Now, again, because in late 1990s, in the UK, because of various reasons, they separated the banking regulation out to the Financial Services Authority. And that became a fashion. So we have an unending number of committees saying take banking regulation out of the Reserve Bank, which again just aping what those fellows do. What happened after the financial crisis 2008-9? The government of the United Kingdom brought back financial regulation into the Bank of England. They shut down the FSA. They brought it back into the Bank of England. So all I'm saying is that I think that to get ahead, to come back to the theme of middle income trap, we have to have much more confidence in ourselves. That we know what to do. We can think what we do. We don't have to ape what those fellows are doing, right? And now in that context, I'll say one other thing before you shut me up, because everyone has to have dinner also, we still look excessively to the West. You take any conference, right, that we have in India, whether it's business conferences, economist conferences, etc., we get all people from Europe, UK, and the US, among professors, I'm talking about economists, actually. And very little from the East. Second, we are going after FTAs with the UK. We've just done it. It's a very good FTA. The EU and the US. But we withdrew from RCEP. We've not even applied to CPTPP, which the UK is, that is Comprehensive Pacific, I keep forgetting, Trade Partnership, I forget the full, Trans-Pacific Partnership. UK is nowhere near the Pacific, right? But they've applied to be a member of CPTPP. We are in the region, but we're looking to the Atlantic, you know? So this is another aspect of going further ahead, that the fact of the matter is that if you look at any projections, 2/3 of incremental growth in the global economy in the next 20 years will come from Asia, including South Asia, okay? But we are going after fellows who are going down. That is, Europe's growth is going to be 0 or negative for the next 20 years, okay? Because the demographics are going down. They are resisting immigration. US has been doing well for the last 30 years, always actually, because immigration. Now they're shutting down immigrations, they're going to have a bad time also. So what I'm saying is that part of this going on in middle income trap is you have to think differently. I want to just, one major point on this, talking about governance, etc., that it's sort of, you are setting up a research institution, okay? I headed CSEP, which was Brookings India earlier, and I can see this from my experience. Give me an example, then I'll expand it to the country. That when you start, you are the karta dharta, right? You are HR, right? You are finance, right? You have to fundraise. Okay, maybe in your case, you don't have to fundraise because you have a...
That's what everyone thinks.
He doesn't have this problem, right? He's funding, yeah? So, but what I'm saying is that you have to recruit, you have to find funding, I mean, you have to do everything, right? So once you grow to say 100 people, you have to completely change the system. That is, you have to systematize. You'll have an HR fellow, you'll have an accounts department, you'll have 6 different streams in terms of the subjects that you're doing and so on. And so they'll become more systematized. And so, which is what happens when an enterprise goes from small scale to medium scale to large scale, it becomes systematized, okay? So this is the same thing that when a country starts growing, you can do certain things in what you've been doing for 25 years and do well. Look, for 35 years, we've got 6.5% to 7% growth, which is fantastic for as country large as India. Yes, China did 10%, but 6.5%, 7% is fantastic. But you can't go to the next step unless you rejig your systems, whether it's regulation, whether it's function of parliament, whether it's the criminal law, the civil law, the working of the judicial system, all that has to be rejigged. Now, the local, people say local government, they're too corrupt. Are you telling me local governments are more corrupt than the top? No way. It's just that, it's more hidden. So now, the other thing I say now is, that one of the big things that happened, I'm speaking university, is a huge expansion of education last 25 years, finally. We're now producing about 10 million graduates a year, of course, with very degree of huge variance in the quality of these graduates. But the point is that given all these educated people coming out now, you can populate, say, local governments, panchayats, municipal corporations, etc. Right? And there's so much problem unemployment of graduates. If you look at unemployment data, the more qualified you are, the more unemployed you are. Okay? So I'm saying that many of these kind of systemic changes, otherwise you can't go ahead.
I want to thank Amitabhji. It's such a pleasure, not just listening to him, but sitting by his side. He's gentle. He holds my arm each time he's going to say something which, might get me excited. Really. Look, I do have a few thoughts to obviously happily kind of try and conclude or sum up this. But would be great if anyone, yeah, sure, please, sir, one here, and then we'll take, if there are any two or three together, and then wind it up.
So we still are only plucking the low-hanging fruits.
Perfect.
In that sense. So, how do you see that? Is there a change you see in the last 10 years? That's it.
Done.
Thank you.
We'll quickly take if there is any more. Anyone else? Yes, please, sir. If the mic can go to the gentleman in the wonderful T-shirt.
Thank you, sir. This question is particularly with respect to Shishir, sir, and as well as Dr. Mohan, sir. This question I would tend to ask in the previous session, but somehow I could not ask. Since we all know that in 2015, India has basically launched its model BIT 2015. So in that, it basically removed few clauses, specifically the MFN clauses. That is, as you rightly said in the previous session, that we are now moving towards multilateralism to the bilateralism. That is, there is few anti-globalization sentiments revolves around the India. So my question is basically, now it's been 10 years. So how far we are able to negotiate bilateral investment treaties with the first world countries, specifically with respect to the US, UK, and the European Union. Moreover, yes, there are advances like the free trade agreement and other agreements. So after the model BIT, how we are negotiating currently in the apart from other platform with respect to the WTO.
Thanks so much. If I don't, my apologies. Nini, Api, please, the lady in the blue suit has.
I think, sir, it was fantastic listening to you. I just have one question. You mentioned in your interjections that what we need right now is the third generation reforms. So if you could point out one or three sectors which needs utmost attention right now.
Okay, with that, I give it to you. And when she said it was fantastic listening to you, she was not meaning me. She was meaning you. So go ahead.
Thank you for those very good questions. Well, I know good economics, but I don't know what is good or bad politics. When I first became economic advisor in the government of India in 1986, I had a terrific economics professor, a very famous Arnold Harberger, who just turned 100 last year. And so I called him and asked him, what's your advice? So he gave me some very good advice. I always remember. He said that you're paid to be economic advisor, not political advisor. That is, someone else is being paid to do that. So your job is to give clean economic advice. It's your boss, that is the minister, or in this case our secretary. He has the job of doing the balancing between what is feasible socially, politically, etc. Your job is to give clean economic advice. That's what I always followed. But then when I became Secretary of Economic Affairs, then of course I had to, then my job was not just clean economic advice. Okay? But to come back to this point about good economics, bad politics, I don't know if there's any evidence of good economics leading to bad political results. Okay, there is an issue of communication. Okay, and one thing I must say is that the big difference in the current government, last 10 years, and previous governments, is that communications is terrific. I may not like some things that they do and communicate, but the point is the quality of the communication is really first class. So that's my point, that therefore if you're doing good economics policies, you've got to explain much better. Right? And to give another example, when we did the economic reform in the 1990s, one of the fears we had was that because you were at the same time opening up foreign direct investment, you were opening up trade, you were increasing, you were delicensing, overall we were increasing competition terrifically compared to the previous periods. So we had feared that, look, some enterprises may close down, public sector, private sector, whoever, who start becoming uncompetitive, and therefore you must have a safety net for labor. Okay? So we did devise a program which never actually happened. I'm giving this as an example that if you're doing certain reforms and changes in economic policy, you've got to look at who are the losers and who are the winners. Winners you don't care about, right? They're in damn good shape. They'll be happy. But the losers, you have to think of what to do. Okay? In the US right now, what's the problem? Okay? One of the interesting things to me is that how a completely false narrative has been built to justify many of the wrong economic policies they're doing. What I mean wrong narrative? If you look at the data, US has been the best performing economy among advanced economies for the last 25 to 50 years. Okay? They've had low unemployment for the last 15 years, low inflation except for the COVID spike. But somehow the narrative has been turned out saying we're in very bad shape. We are victims. Okay? When they've done the best. Right? Why has this happened? Because there are certain pockets of some manufacturing pockets which have been hit. And so there's a lot of problems out there. Now the solution to that, in my view, is communication, doing something for those areas, doing something for labor mobility so that they don't suffer as much as they've done. But what has happened is that because those areas have had these problems, it's because general thing the whole country has a problem. The country taking advantage of us. So that's just a couple of examples that you've got to, when you do some things which are good for, say, the medium term, but causing some pain in the short term, you've got to take care of that. You've got to communicate. That's at least my understanding. But obviously, I will never be a politician, so I don't know what is good politics. Then on the trade question is too complicated because there's so many. You can have a full lecture on that. But I'll give you my impressions. One, that I don't know enough about the bilateral investment treaties to make any comment actually on what has happened, etc. But I can say something on trade agreements. That what has happened in the world, of course, as you're saying, that the WTO has been really weakened. Okay, so the consequence of that is that you have a whole number of regional trade agreements. Some are bilateral, but FTAs, but many. So you've sort of divided the world. There's the US, Mexico, Canada agreement, which is also under some strain. Mercosur in Latin America. EU, of course, is the largest group. And RCEP in Asia, plus the CPTPP that I'm talking about. From our point of view, this is a big problem. That is, we are not member of any of these. And if the future doesn't bring back something like the WTO, then you're not in any grouping. So it's difficult to have efficient supply chains if you're not in any grouping. So, for example, suppose you joined the RCEP and you became much better part of the Asian supply chain. Your export to the US will also increase because you're part of the supply chain. And of course, among the, since I've just been to China as the top in my mind, if you look at the countries exporting to China, what do you think is our rank in that? is number 31. You would never guess the country just above us, the huge country called Ireland. Okay? And this is what I'm saying, again, part of this middle income trap. You're not trading with the second largest country, you're importing everything from them. You say, I'm not doing RCEP because I'm scared of these characters. Why should India be scared of anyone? I don't know. I'm not. But the point is, without doing the RCEP, you're importing everything from them, but not exporting to them. So what are we afraid of? In any case, all the imports are coming. You have a huge, massive trade deficit with China. So this comes back to state capacity and self-confidence. But the future, as far as I can see, for the next 10 years, is the regional trade agreements. And so you have to find ways and means. Now, Vietnam is part of, I think, of 3 regional trade agreements, for example. There's nothing, I think it's terrific you have an EU trade agreement. Terrific if you have UK, etc. But why aren't we looking east? That's where the economy is, that's where the demand is going to be. 4 billion people between ASEAN plus China plus Japan plus Korea plus South Asia, 4 billion people. If 4 billion people have 4% annual growth in the next 20 years, everyone buys one pair of trousers every year extra. This huge demand, no? We haven't missed the bus. So we've got to go into that. So I don't know if that's sort of partially addressing your question, but all I'm saying is that we have to be much more oriented towards trade, which means both imports and exports. It also means FDI, because a lot of the trade is intra-firm trade. So when you have large FDI, what happens? Some company comes from Japan, China, UK, wherever, right? They establish things here. Then they import stuff from their plants out there. Then export back or export somewhere else. Large part of trade is intra-trade. And that's what we're missing by not having adequate FDI and trade agreements.
Few words for the lady.
Final question on the third generation reforms. You'll have to invite me for a day-long lecture.
Or dinner, right now.
But for some of the things I've mentioned, that is enhancing state capacity, changing your system of administration, okay, getting away from the colonial viceroy system of administration, building domain capacity in whether it's regulators, whether it's engineering departments, whether it's the administrators, etc. When we talk about, for example, ease of doing business, okay, my view on that is, why don't we have ease of doing business? It's because your laws are not well framed. The people then administering those laws are not well trained. And there's confusion in the laws, so at every point in time, you can be caught in the web, and corruption also happens. Right? So, and finally, I mean, there's a whole menu, okay? But one big thing, the thing that has puzzled me the most since 1991, is that we concentrated on industrial policy. One thing that is not done well is manufacturing. Manufacturing. And I don't understand why not. And especially labor-intensive manufacturing.
Sure.
We say we've skipped, we're going to services. Again, if you look at the data, actually the share of services in GDP in China is a point or two higher than ours. So it's not the case we're doing damn well in service, their share is higher. The IT exports also higher than us. The difference is that we still have 45% of our population, of our labor force in agriculture, and 15% or something, and I forget the number, in manufacturing. It's the opposite. That's the biggest issue, or is why we have not done labor-intensive manufacturing. I'm tempted to say, without evidence, and especially in a school which has much more knowledge of anthropology, sociology, history, and everything else, is it to do with our caste system? But that's a throwaway thing which I'm not qualified to take. But my point is that our upper classes are just not interested in work with hands. I'll end with an example on this.
Sure.
I did my first degree was in electrical engineering in England at Imperial College. And in the final year, at the final semester, we had to do a project. I had a class of about 90 students in the electrical engineering class, and there were 6 or 7 of us, 8 of us subcontinentals, that is Pakistani, Indian, Indians from Malaysia, Indian from Kenya, Indian from Trinidad, etc., etc. What was interesting was that except for us, 5, 6 of us, 7 of us, something like that, everyone built some apparatus, using their hands, built some electrical engineering apparatus. All of us did some software project, some IT at that time, right? So what I'm saying is, we just don't like, I'm including myself in that, by the way, we just don't like to get our hands dirty. You hear much more about AI in India than anywhere else in the world. We're so excited by AI. And yet, you go out of the street, people can't put two nuts and bolts together, right? So anyway, so this is, what I'm saying is, I don't have the answer to this, but we really have to concentrate on how we increase manufacturing, and particularly labor-intensive manufacturing.
Look, this is obviously outstanding, and genuinely, from the time we started to the time now, the room's much, much more filler. So I think if we carried on, you'll soon have a full room, because people will have dinner and keep coming back.
And only 2-3 people walked out.
No. Look, again, thank you so much to Professor Amitabh Bhattuji, because, I personally, I must be very honest, didn't realize how important not falling into the middle income trap is in the context of this journey to 2047, and I'm really happy that you've raised it. Obviously, it's clear it's complex, not falling in. There are very, very difficult causal linkages. You can't say do this and therefore that'll happen, it won't happen. But if I sum everything that you said into 2 broad parts, policy and governance, both have to be focused on.
I have to end where I started.
Yeah.
Suggestion, Dean Mattu, with your Vice Chancellor, you must have a strong rule: the campus cannot have gunmen in the campus. Okay? Offensive, it is against free thinking, etc. I remember when I was at Princeton, then President Marcos's daughter was at Princeton. So she had bodyguards. But bodyguards were not allowed inside the campus.
Sir, to our...
Thank you, sir, for this very insightful special address. Now I request the chair to please present flowers and memento for this occasion to Dr. Rakesh Mohan. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a full day of working sessions starting at 9 a.m. tomorrow. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and a very, very good night for tonight. Thanks. Please note that the dinner is by invitation only.